Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show that, well, cuts through the noise and gets you straight to the heart of what's happening. If you've been anywhere near the news lately, you know the crypto space has been a bit of a whirlwind, especially around digital assets like Bitcoin and XRP. So today, we're taking a full deep dive into just that. The huge recent developments around XRP, how it fundamentally differs from Bitcoin, and honestly, the truly seismic shifts happening right now in the global regulatory landscape for all digital assets.
That's exactly right. Our mission here really is to give you that shortcut, help you get incredibly well informed without feeling completely overwhelmed by all the jargon and updates. We're going to pull out the most important bits of knowledge and insight from all the recent reports and news, and we won't just cover what happened, but crucially, why it actually matters to you.
Okay, let's start with the big one. For years, it felt like the entire crypto world kind of held its breath whenever Ripple's name came up. This massive 5-year legal battle between Ripple Labs and the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, over XRP. It's like this dark cloud, constantly reminding everyone of the regulatory uncertainty. But now, finally, that cloud seems to have lifted. Let's unpack this big story first. It's officially over.
Indeed, it really is a significant moment. On August 7, 2025, both Ripple and the SEC filed a joint dismissal of appeals. This was in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, and it brought this, very prolonged dispute to a definitive close. And as part of that settlement, Ripple agreed to pay a $125 million fine.
Right, the fine. And the market, it reacted immediately, pretty dramatically too. XRP's price surged, about 5%, to approximately $3.27 right after the settlement was announced. But what's really interesting, looking at the sentiment from some sources, is this idea that it wasn't just a fleeting jump. Some are calling it a potential new foundation for XRP, shifting from what was seen as a ceiling to now maybe a base of support. What's your take on that new foundation idea? Is that just market hype, or is there something really tangible there? Does this mean XRP is sort of maturing?
That's a great question, and I think maturing is a good word for it. The tangible support really comes from that newfound regulatory clarity. This isn't just, a short-term pump fueled by retail excitement. It's more about institutional players finally getting a clearer green light. Think about it. Before this settlement, major players like banks, asset managers, they were extremely wary because of that legal cloud.
Understandably so.
Exactly. Now, with this resolution, they can actually start to seriously consider XRP for, real-world applications and potentially integration. This shift in the potential buyer profile fundamentally changes the market dynamics. It becomes less about speculative trading and more about its long-term utility within established financial systems. That's the real price discovery people are talking about, moving beyond maybe retail frenzy towards valuing as fundamental use case.
Okay, that makes sense. But playing devil's advocate for a second. Some critics might look at that $125 million fine for, 5 years of alleged unregistered security sales and think it's a relatively small price to pay, almost like a slap on the wrist. Does that risk undermining the SEC's regulatory clout, or is this genuinely seen as a win for the industry?
It's definitely a nuanced outcome, no doubt about it. For the SEC, it's a settlement. It's not a complete victory in court on every single point they argued.
Yeah.
So that might temper some of their, let's say, enforcement enthusiasm in similar kinds of cases down the line. But for the crypto industry, and especially for Ripple itself, it's widely seen as a massive win. And the main reason is that word, clarity.
Clarity.
Exactly. The market now has a much clearer path forward for XRP in the US, and that's just invaluable for any business operating in such a rapidly evolving space like crypto. It basically allows companies like Ripple to shift from playing defense, focusing on legal battles, to playing offense, focusing on growth and innovation.
And focusing on growth seems to be exactly what Ripple is doing now, right? Especially when you look globally, that's where things seem to be getting really interesting for them. What's driving this big international expansion push we're seeing, like with SBI Holdings in Japan?
Absolutely. They're not wasting any time. Post-settlement, Ripple immediately announced plans to allocate a pretty substantial sum, $200 million, towards strategic growth. It really shows how ready they are to capitalize on this new clarity. And their ambitions are pretty clear. Domestically, they're working to establish the Ripple National Trust Bank in New York. The goal there is to integrate XRP directly into the U.S. financial infrastructure and facilitate institutional liquidity using both XRP and their stablecoin, RLUSD. They're essentially trying to make moves to bypass traditional intermediaries like ACH and Fedwire.
That's ambitious.
Very. And globally, you're seeing huge votes of confidence. You mentioned Japan's SBI Holdings, a major Ripple stakeholder. They've filed to launch the country's first ever Bitcoin XRP ETF.
It's
huge. And they also plan to purchase up to $1 billion in XRP. That's a massive commitment.
Wow. Okay.
Plus, you look at South Korea, their BDACS, which is a regulated crypto custodian, has integrated XRP for institutional access on major exchanges there, like Upbit and Quinone. So the institutional doors are opening internationally, too.
So, stepping back, this resolution, it isn't just a big deal for Ripple and XRP holders, is it? It sounds like it could genuinely set a significant precedent for how other digital assets might be viewed or classified under U.S. securities law. How does that broader impact potentially affect us, people listening who are interested in the wider crypto space?
It absolutely could influence future regulatory actions across the entire crypto industry in the U.S. For you, the listener, this really signals a potential shift. Moving away from an era of deep uncertainty and regulatory ambiguity toward a much clearer path for blockchain companies, especially in how they interact with the traditional U.S. financial system. It could mean hopefully less time and resources spent by these companies on legal worries and more focus on building, innovating, and providing actual utility.
Okay, so with that major legal hurdle now cleared for XRP, it really throws its unique position in the market into sharp relief. Which brings us perfectly to that fundamental question. How does XRP actually stack up against Bitcoin? The original gangster, the king of crypto. They often get talked about in the same breath, but they seem to serve very different purposes, right?
That's such a crucial distinction, and one that many people still miss. At a very high level, yes, both are cryptocurrencies, but XRP was generally designed from the ground up to be cheaper, faster, more scalable, and significantly more environmentally friendly than Bitcoin. They really fulfill quite different roles in the whole digital asset ecosystem.
Let's unpack Bitcoin first then. Most people know it or think they know it. It's a blockchain, a cryptocurrency, primarily seen today as a store of value, maybe a medium of exchange, although its original white paper talked about global payments. It uses that proof-of-work consensus mechanism, Power WT. Can you maybe break that down simply?
Sure. Think of proof of work like a massive global competition. You have the powerful computers called miners, all racing to solve incredibly complex cryptographic puzzles. The first one to find the solution gets to validate the next block of transactions on the blockchain, and as a reward, they earn newly created bitcoins.
Okay, but that comes with downsides.
Definitely. The main ones are that it's incredibly energy intensive. The computations require vast amounts of electricity. It can also lead to high network fees, especially during busy periods. You mentioned seeing medians as high as $128, though it fluctuates, so it's much lower, around $1.20 in late 2024. Still unpredictable.
Right.
And transaction times can be slow. Officially, it's about 10 minutes for a block, but realistically for confirmation, it can take anywhere from that 10 minutes up to several hours sometimes.
And then there's the supply aspect. Bitcoin has that famous fixed supply, 21 million BTC, that will ever exist. And the halving events, like the one in April 2024, which cut the new supply awarded to miners in half, down to 3.125 Bitcoins per block. The idea being to increase scarcity and potentially demand and value over time.
Exactly. Now contrast all of that with XRP. XRP is the native token of the XRP Ledger blockchain, or XRPL. It was specifically engineered to be a faster, cheaper payment system. Its primary intended use case is as an intermediate currency or a bridge currency, mainly for cross-border transactions between businesses and financial institutions.
So different consensus mechanism too.
Completely different. It uses something unique called the XRPL consensus protocol. It's not proof of work at all. It's more of a cooperative agreement system among trusted validators. The result is that it consumes literally negligible amounts of energy compared to Bitcoin.
And the speed and cost.
Transactions are nearly instant. We're talking typically 3 to 5 seconds to confirm. And the fees are tiny, built-in fees of just 0.000001 XRP per transaction. And an interesting detail, those fees are actually burned by the network.
Burned, meaning destroyed.
Yes, removed from circulation permanently. It's a very small amount per transaction, but it's a deflationary mechanism built into the ledger. Over time, it very slowly reduces the total supply of XRP. It's kind of like a subtle, continuous version of Bitcoin's halving, just achieved through network usage rather than a pre-programmed event.
That's fascinating.
And it's really important to hammer home that common misconception. XRP is the digital asset, the token. Ripple is the private company that utilizes XRP and the XRPL. Ripple does not own or control the XRP ledger itself. It's open source technology.
That's a critical distinction, definitely worth repeating. I'm curious, though, does the underlying tech, like the specific cryptographic algorithms they use, does that play a big role in why they function so differently? Bitcoin for value, XRP for payments.
Oh, absolutely. The cryptographic foundations are tailored for their specific jobs. Bitcoin uses algorithms like SHA 256, and 6, ECDSA, RIPE-MMD 160. These are optimized for security within that energy-intensive proof-of-work model. They prioritize decentralization and making the ledger extremely difficult to change.
Yeah.
The XRP ledger, on the other hand, uses algorithms like SHA 512, EDDSA, and also supports ECDSA SecB 256K1. These choices are geared towards speed and efficiency, enabling those near-instant, super low-cost transactions that are essential if you want to build a high-volume payment system on top of it. So yes, the core technology choices directly impact their real-world utility and the kind of problems they're best suited to solve.
Got it. And what about the versatility of accounts on each network? You mentioned something about tokenizing assets earlier.
Right, that's another key difference. An account on the XRP ledger is quite flexible. It can natively represent or tokenize various other types of assets. So you could issue stablecoins, other cryptocurrencies, utility tokens, even regulated security tokens directly on the XRP ledger itself.
Whereas Bitcoin
accounts at the base layer are primarily designed just to hold Bitcoin. Now, you can represent other assets using second-layer solutions built on top of Bitcoin, like the Lightning Network or other protocols. But it's not a native function of the main Bitcoin blockchain itself in the same way. This makes the XRP ledger inherently quite adaptable for a wide range of financial applications beyond just its native token.
Okay, let's talk market characteristics then. Bitcoin clearly has the larger market capitalization and a much higher price per coin. You said earlier this is mainly because investors have decided it is more valuable. New Bitcoins come from those mining block rewards, and the supply issuance rate gets cut by the halvings. How does XRP supply work? You mentioned Ripple got a large chunk.
That's right. With XRP, there's a fixed supply of 100 billion XRP created right at the ledger's launch, no mining involved. Of that 100 billion, about 80 billion were initially allocated to Ripple, the company. Ripple then placed a large portion of this into cryptographically secured escrow accounts. They periodically release some XRP from this escrow. The figure often cited is up to 1 billion XRP per month. However, any portion of that monthly amount that Ripple doesn't actually sell or use typically gets returned to a new escrow account, extending the release schedule. So it's not like 1 billion just floods the market automatically each month.
Right. That's another important clarification.
So summing up the comparison, is one better than the other? It honestly just depends on your perspective, your goals, and how you define value. Bitcoin has established itself primarily as digital gold, a store of value. XRP is aiming to be a highly efficient bridge asset for payments. Each has its own purpose, its own technology, its own community, and its own use cases. It really raises that interesting question, doesn't it? How do these different technological designs and supply mechanisms ultimately shape their market value and their utility in the wider financial world? And what does that mean for how you, as an observer or potential user, might view them?
Definitely food for thought. Now let's widen our lens again beyond just Bitcoin and XRP to the entire digital asset ecosystem. You used the phrase seismic shift earlier regarding the global regulatory landscape. It feels like we're moving really fast from ambiguity, maybe even hostility in some places, towards, well, something resembling regulatory clarity. Governments worldwide finally seem to be getting serious.
They absolutely are. It's a global phenomenon. In the US, for example, there's a definite shift toward regulatory clarity that supports institutional engagement. That's a key phrase. We're seeing the impact of recent executive actions and changes in how agencies are making rules. It's leading towards a more well-defined framework, which is exactly what encourages institutional investment.
And things like ETFs.
Yes, the approval of staked exchange-traded funds, or ETFs, that go beyond just Bitcoin and Ethereum is a big deal.
Right.
That brings in more mainstream interest and offers investors ways to earn passive income from staking the underlying assets, but through a familiar investment product.
Right.
There's also a noticeable push for industry alignment. The idea is that regulators and financial institutions are starting to work more closely together. This could lead to a much smoother integration between traditional finance TradFi and decentralized finance DeFi.
What about stablecoins? That's been a hot topic.
Very much so. We're seeing established stablecoin regulation emerging. Comprehensive legislation is paving the way for things like bank-issued stablecoins, alongside strong consumer protections. This seems to signal a preference, at least in the US, for a market-driven stablecoin ecosystem rather than rushing into a central bank digital currency or a CBDC.
Interesting.
Plus, the whole area of tokenized securities and real-world assets, RWAs tokenizing things like stocks, bonds, real estate, that's gaining serious traction within this clearer regulatory environment.
Okay, let's hop across the Atlantic. Europe seems to be ahead of the curve in some ways with MiCAR, right? What's the latest there?
Yes, MiCAR. The EU's markets in crypto assets regulation. It officially entered into force back in July 2023, but it became fully operational, meaning all its rules started applying in December 2024.
And it's pretty comprehensive.
Extremely. MiCAR aims to create a single, uniform framework providing legal certainty right across the 27 EU member states. That's its main goal. Key requirements include things like mandatory authorization and ongoing supervision for crypto asset service providers, CASPs, basically exchanges, wallet providers, etc. There are also strict rules around transparency and disclosure for anyone issuing crypto assets, strong consumer protection measures, and crucially, operational resilience requirements.
Operational resilience.
Yes, that's largely covered by a related piece of legislation called DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act. It essentially forces crypto service providers, just like banks, to have really robust IT systems to prevent outages, handle cyber attacks, and ensure business continuity. That's vital for building institutional trust.
Makes sense.
MiCAR also categorizes different types of tokens like asset reference tokens, ARTs, stablecoins backed by a basket of assets, e-money tokens, EMP stablecoins backed by a single fiat currency, and utility tokens, and applies specific rules to each category.
Is it fully live everywhere in the EU now?
Well, mostly. There's a transitional grandfathering period built in, which allows firms that were already operating before MiCAR to continue doing so until mid-2026 to get authorized. However, and this is where it gets a bit complex, some EU countries have decided to shorten that grace period. Germany and Italy, for instance, reduced it to just 12 months, and Lithuania actually cut it down to 0 months from December 2024. So there's some variations emerging across the bloc in how quickly firms need to comply.
Okay, so not perfectly uniform yet in practice. What about the UK? They're obviously outside the EU now. Are they keeping pace?
The UK is definitely advancing its own extensive framework, yes. They announced plans in late 2024 to bring a broad range of crypto asset and stablecoin activities into the regulated financial services perimeter. The full framework is expected to be implemented during 2026. The FCA, their financial conduct authority, has published its crypto roadmap detailing the approach. And interestingly, there's continued discussion about a potential digital pound, a UK CBDC, possibly by 2030, though that's still very much in the exploration phase.
It really feels like a global race, in a way. What are we seeing in major hubs in Asia and other parts of the world?
It certainly has that feel. Connecting this to the bigger picture, you see major Asian financial centers like Hong Kong SAR really stepping up their crypto frameworks to foster growth. They're aiming to become regional digital asset hubs, introducing new licensing regimes for exchanges and setting quite strict requirements for stablecoin issuers. Singapore continues with its rigorous licensing regime, but seems more focused on exploring a wholesale CBDC rather than a retail one. And Japan has been particularly interesting. They've officially declared Web 3.0 as one of the key pillars for the growth of the Japanese economy. They've even gone as far as amending their laws to allow decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, to register and gain legal status similar to limited liability companies, LLCs. That's quite forward-thinking.
Wow, DAOs as LLCs, that's different. And beyond those major hubs, it sounds like almost every country is working on something.
That's pretty much the case. You see diverse approaches, but definite activity across so many jurisdictions. You listed quite a few earlier. Bahrain, Brazil, Canada, Cayman Islands, the Channel Islands, Gibraltar, India, Isle of Man, Kenya, Liechtenstein, Mauritius, Norway, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Switzerland, Taiwan, Turkey, the UAE, Ukraine. The list goes on.
A lot of focus seems to be on illicit finance.
Yes, a common thread for many is strengthening anti-money laundering, AML, and counter-terrorist financing, CFT measures. This often includes implementing the global standard known as the travel rule for crypto transactions.
The travel rule, that's the one requiring exchanges and providers to share sender and recipient information for transactions above a certain threshold, right? Similar to bank wires.
Exactly that. It's designed to prevent anonymous transfers being used for illicit purposes. And this brings us to the role of those global standard-setting bodies. Groups like the Financial Stability Board, FSB, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, BCBS, the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, which is behind the travel rule, and the International Organization of Securities Commissions, ISOCO.
How much power do these bodies actually have?
That's a key point. Their recommendations do not carry a legal status in themselves. Countries aren't legally forced to adopt them. However, they provide an incredibly important roadmap for national authorities. Think of them as providing the blueprints and best practices for crypto regulation globally. They operate under that core principle: same activity, same risk, same regulation, trying to ensure a level playing field and prevent regulatory arbitrage.
And what are their main focus areas right now?
They're concentrating on several key areas. Things like safeguarding client assets held by crypto firms, addressing potential conflicts of interest, improving cross-border cooperation between regulators, setting prudential standards, capital requirements for banks that hold crypto assets, pushing for better AML-CFT implementation, especially getting that travel rule working effectively, and promoting investor education and protection.
You mentioned the travel rule implementation. How's that actually going?
Well, it's interesting. Despite these concerted global efforts and the standard being set by FATF, recent reports suggest that full compliance and effective implementation of the travel rule across jurisdictions is still lagging quite significantly.
Really? Why is that?
There are various technical and jurisdictional challenges in getting different systems and countries to share information smoothly and securely. It shows there is still a fair bit of work to do to get global standards consistently applied in practice.
Right. Okay, wow. We have covered a huge amount of ground in this deep dive. We went from the really monumental conclusion of that Ripple SEC lawsuit and the ripple effect, no pun intended, on XRP, to breaking down the stark differences between Bitcoin and XRP, and finally taking that sweeping look at how regulations are rapidly shaping the future of digital assets all around the world.
We certainly did. And all this development, this rapid evolution and integration, it really brings up a crucial question for you, the listener, to think about. As these digital assets continue to weave themselves into traditional financial systems globally, how might these evolving regulatory frameworks influence not just the technology itself, but maybe even the very concept of financial sovereignty and cross-border commerce over the next decade? What kind of impact do you think a more regulated crypto market will ultimately have on the balance between individual innovation and institutional control? Something to definitely mull over.